Hello and welcome to another episode of the Gritty Hour. I have two special guests today, my boys from the Bronx. And they've both been on the podcast in the past. I got Freddie Romandetto. How you doing, Fred? Welcome back.
Thomas, how are you?
Good.
Thank
And
you.
Mr. J.R. McCarthy, who's been on several times himself. Welcome back, J.R.
Mr. J.R. McCarthy, if you please. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tom. It's always a pleasure.
It always is a pleasure just to see
Yeah.
you guys.
Yeah. And likewise.
So I've been working on sort of like a project. I can't believe how long I've been doing this podcast. It's about 3 or 4 years already. I think 4 years. And I was re-listening recently to some of the first ones, just to see how far I've come and maybe do something with them for the future. And I came across a podcast that you and I did, Fred, where we just shooting the breeze about growing up in the Bronx, and
Right.
we're talking about some of the things you've done in your employment over the years, and you mentioned you and Jay and JR's brother Dennis working at St. Patty's Cathedral when you were young, teenagers maybe, over the summer or whatever. So I just hearing that again recently, revisiting that podcast, it put it in my head that I've been meaning to have you guys on to talk about some of the stories about working in St. Patrick's Cathedral. So I invited you both, and you cordially accepted the invitation, which I appreciate. So tell us a little bit about what it was like working there.
JR, you want to start, JR? Since you were the veteran there.
I think JR's computer froze, actually.
Oh yeah.
I think we scared him into not.
All right. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
while he gets back on, I can. I guess I'll. Yeah. So, I happened to end up there right after college. Graduated. Wasn't having any luck finding something in my career of choice, and so JR kindly got me in there.
Mhm.
Uh, so,
How old were you?
Graduating college, I must have been about 22. I
Okay.
think. Summer of 1984.
Ah, okay.
So yeah, I worked there from June till December, so 6 months in
Mhm.
1984, and a very interesting 6 months, I got to say. I know for years I heard the stories from Jerry and Dennis because they worked there, I think, since high school,
Yeah.
and but yeah, some crazy stories, and yeah, I see why now.
I forgot to mention in the beginning that I do have a picture of St. Pat's behind my large head.
Yep,
So yeah, just to get you in
place
the
there.
mood, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
you were in maintenance, right? Was it
yeah,
maintenance?
yeah, yeah. And what I found funny, the name of the company, which was owned by the Archdiocese, was called Ecclesiastical Maintenance Service.
What was it?
Ecle e Ecclesiast. Wait, how do you say it? Like the
Ecclesiastical.
yeah,
Ecclesiastical. Yeah.
Ecclesiastical Maintenance Service. That was actually the name of the company that I was employed by,
It
which
sounds like
ultimately,
it sounds like you're doing maintenance and God's work at the same
yeah,
time.
right,
Yeah. Yeah.
which yeah, ultimately was owned by the Archdiocese. So yeah, so
Hmm.
and yeah, maintenance, buffing floors. The one part that I really despised was cleaning out the candles. Because back then, remember, I mean, now I understand. I haven't been there in a while, but but I understand it's all electronic now, right? The candles.
Yeah. You put a quarter or whatever in,
Right,
and
right.
yeah.
No, back then it was old school. It was actually a wax candle in a little, votive.
Uh-huh.
And yeah,
Ironically, the thing I miss about the candles is the smell in the church of the
oh yeah, yeah.
burning
That's something you
candles.
never forget. Yeah, yeah.
It was
And
the
yeah,
ambiance of the,
it does. It gives it that
Hey,
whole, besides the incense, yeah, the
yeah.
candles.
Hmm.
You're in a church.
Yeah. I think
Um,
JR's struggling to try and come back, but
yep.
so you worked there how many months?
Yeah, 6 months.
6 months. And
Six
what
very interesting months.
I
Yep.
think I remember I was explaining that I was revisiting some old podcasts.
Right.
And I remember you mentioning that you worked, what was it, overnight or the night shift or something?
Actually, I guess you could call it a second shift. If I remember, it was like in the after, probably 3 to 11, I believe.
Mhm.
2 or 3 to 11. Yeah, it was like a second shift, which wasn't that bad. Um, I still remember getting home every night just in time to watch Dave Letterman.
Ah,
Dave Letterman on when he was still on at
you drive in, or did you take the subway?
I took a subway, which
Yeah.
it's funny when I think about it now, I would never get on a subway at that hour.
At that age, were you living in Morris Park, in the
Yep,
Bronx?
yep,
Yeah.
yep. So I'd
You
get
got
off at the
to
square, get off
take
the
the
square,
five,
and
take the
like
5 train, was it?
not a 6.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because from St. Patrick's I walked over to Elect and got on the 6 right there.
But how'd you get over to Morris Park?
I walked. I got off at the square, Westchester Square,
Oh, really?
and hoofed it on Williamsbridge Road. Oh, yeah, but
That's a pretty good hike.
around midnight. Hey, I was in good shape at 22, right? Now, oh, forget it. You'd have to drag me. You'd have to
You
put me over your shoulder.
get off the train and call an Uber immediately.
Oh yeah, if there was Uber, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, but you know what? You're young. Who's afraid, right? Walking the
Mhm.
streets at midnight in the Bronx and not
Yeah.
being on the subway. Yeah, and it was fun. It was like, you know what it is? I live with my parents still, but I felt like an adult.
It was
You know,
before you were married, yeah?
oh yeah, definitely, yeah. Just out of college, and yeah. So I don't think, but
Hey, fellas,
Yes,
yes,
Mr.
sir.
McCarthy.
I don't have.
I'm just trying to figure out how to turn the camera.
I'm trying to figure out how to turn on my camera.
Okay.
I had to go to another computer. I'm sorry. I know you were taping. I apologize.
That's okay. You
Yeah.
want me to pause taping while we figure you out? We can do that. Yeah. You mind, Fred?
No problem.
All right. All right. So JR's back in audio form only. Freddie and I have our mugs up here, but JR, welcome back.
Listen, sorry about that, fellas. But on the upside, you don't have to look at me.
You're a beautiful man,
From space.
Yeah. But Freddie was just talking about the few months he was down there in St. Pat's.
Uh-huh.
And he was saying you were there for many years, yes?
Oh, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
I worked at St. Patrick's Cathedral from August of 1979 till about May or June of 1985.
Wow.
There was a little overlap between my career at St. Patrick's and my career at Monsignor Scanlon High School. I was my first year at Scanlon, I continued to work part-time at the Cathedral.
Yeah, Scanlon was your first teaching job, yes?
Yep. And I started as an altar boy at St. Patrick's Cathedral in 1978 when I was still in high school. I'm
Now,
pretty
JR.
sure. Yeah.
78. That would be Cardinal Cook, right?
Oh, you betcha. Yes.
Yep.
I have stories about Cardinal Cook, and they're good stories. Cardinal Cook was a very gracious and very unpretentious fellow, and he went out of his way on more than one occasion to be nice to me when he didn't have to be nice to me, and I wasn't the only one. He had, in a very quiet way, he had a regard for the people, especially the young people who worked there. But at one point, I think I'm pretty sure I was the tallest altar boy in New York City at one point. And I always manned the cross. I was always bringing up. As a matter of fact, I think that's probably why they offered me a job, because I was hulking. And, the concept was that the ushers were there for security as well as service of the church. But, I guess we'll get there. So you asked me for the time and I built you a watch, but I worked at St. Patrick's Cathedral for about 7 years.
Speaking of security, don't they have a permanent NYPD presence in there?
They have a much more, I don't want to say aggressive, but a much more obvious and a much more proactive service. They literally had, when I was there, one beat cop who came in on a daily basis and looked over the place. But when the occasion warranted it, we would have to call the cops to come in. And the occasion warranted it on more than one occasion.
How often did that happen?
I can tell you I'm going to say myself probably a dozen times or more. We actually had to have police assistance in the removal of somebody or the diffusing of a situation. And that was, I mean, you know, we had protocols for when it became necessary to do that. And they had very little to do with the prospect of violence or anything like that. Fred, I don't know. I don't remember if you were you working at St. Patrick's when I'm trying to collect my thoughts here. The gentleman's name, tragically ironically, was Jonathan Winters.
I remember. It was on the news. It was a big
Yes.
story. It was horrible. Yeah.
So
Sad.
and without getting into a lot of awful details, there was a gentleman, unfortunately, who late one night was killed by somebody who came in for bad purposes, and that changed everything about the way security operated at the cathedral.
Well, who was
And-
Mr. Winters?
Yeah, and he was a gentleman who worked as an usher at the cathedral. I didn't think we would get into this quickly, but when I first started working at St. Patrick's, the ushers were almost invariably young guys in college and elderly men, men who had retired from their respective professions and were making a little pocket money by working at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And more often than not, on a regular weeknight, when there isn't much going on in the cathedral, at least not back then, that would usually be the pairing. You know, there would be an elderly guy and a young guy, and all the duties of the ushers, which I guess we'll get into a little later, would be handled by those fellas. And the tragic circumstances of, and he was a wonderful man. He was a gentleman. He was a great guy. And, you know, it was really a matter of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the prelude to that was Cardinal O'Connor courted a lot more controversy than Cardinal Cook. And in O'Connor's time, there were a lot more protests at the cathedral, and there was a lot more aggressive opposition to some of the positions he took. So police presence became a regular, even a daily thing. But you know, I don't know if this was where we were planning to go with this.
The lottery numbers are as follows.
Yeah. You know.
Was it Don Iverson had that guy on?
Oh yeah, the keynote numbers are as follows.
Yeah,
Yes, it was a terrible impersonation of John O'Connor, who was
He didn't
actually
even have a
born
brogue.
and raised in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't Archbishop Dolan from Pennsylvania too?
If
Wasn't
I'm
he
not mistaken, Dolan is from Missouri,
But wasn't
and
he?
he was the Archbishop of Milwaukee.
Oh, I thought it was
When he
Philadelphia.
got
Okay.
when he got tagged to be the Archbishop of New York, he was serving as the Archbishop of Milwaukee.
Ah.
And if I'm not mistaken, it was in Dolan's time that they, you know, today, if you go on the website of St. Patrick's Cathedral, and incidentally, they didn't have a website in my time because there was no internet to speak of in my time. You go on the website now, and it's called America's Parish Church. And, you know, I have nothing but affection and reverence for St. Patrick's Cathedral and my time there. But we were not, that's not where we were back then. That was not the, you know, that was an ad campaign that stuck. And later on, to this day, has become the model, I guess. But back in the day, you know, we had, like I said, when we brought the police into the situation, it was always for a matter of propriety. You know, I don't ever, and also a matter for like, we had to close the church at a certain time, and sometimes people would come in and they would prevent us from doing that, only because they refused to leave. So I feel like I'm digging myself into a hole here. What I'm saying, what I would tell you, since we're talking about it, and we were going to talk about it sooner or later anyway, not one moment of my 7 years at St. Patrick's Cathedral did I feel in any way, shape, or form that I was in danger, or that I was even at risk of anything other than annoyance by what was, in retrospect, psychologically disturbed, emotionally disturbed people who, for a variety of different reasons, were attracted to a place that was warm in the winter and cool in the summer. I have charming stories to tell. I have funny stories to tell. It's lamentable that we begin with this tragic tale, but it was kind of like, that was the rude awakening when that gentleman was assaulted. That was the moment when the realization came that the security of the cathedral was something beyond just one cop who just happened to have Fifth Avenue as his, Midtown Fifth Avenue as his beat, and would stop in as a matter of, protocol to the cathedral on a daily basis.
Well, now you were a usher, and Fred, you were in the maintenance ecclesiastical. Don't make me say it.
Yes, I know. Ecclesiastical maintenance services.
There you go.
Or the EMS.
In
The EMS. Yes.
In your capacity, did you have exposure to the public?
Myself? Yeah. Well, yeah. When I was out, one of the duties, and Jay, I'm sure you remember these, was scraping out the candle wax.
Oh yes.
Of the used up candles, which was fun in itself. That was probably the closest I had to exposure with the public, because most of it was spent.
JR, are you there?
You hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
No, yeah.
I'm so sorry about this, but on the upside, like I said, you're not looking at me. Go on. I'm sorry, Fred. Go ahead.
Yeah. So a lot of my duties were, in the parish house, cleaning the floors, the bathrooms, and after the church closed, because I had the late shift, the middle shift, like I was saying before, I think 3 to 11, I think was the shift. So and the cathedral closed what? I think 9.
The cathedral closed at 9.
Yes.
Your shift, I think, was 4 to 11 or 4 to 10:30.
Something like that, 11. Yeah. And so once it closed, I didn't clean the church itself, but more like the sacristy, and the downstairs area where the maintenance guys hung out. So, but I had a little public. And you mentioned having to call the police. One incident stands out in my mind about with that. And I don't know if it was the same beat cop you're talking about, right? The one guy on Fifth Avenue. And this is always a common occurrence there, was people trying to steal money out of those boxes. Right? Yeah, right. And they had, everybody had their own ingenious and clever way of trying to figure out how to get that money out of that little slit in the box. So one day, and this kid was a regular. Somebody, I don't know how they knew him. They said, "Oh yeah, some Irish kid from Queens." They had him pegged. So apparently he was a regular. He always tried to get the money. So one time we actually chased him through the rush hour crowd through Rockefeller Center. I'm like, really? Like, we're gonna find this guy? So, but he had the nerve to come back another time. Okay, and this time he was caught by some other guy there. I forgot what his capacity was, and I think the usher. So the beat cop, so we held him. I didn't hold him, but the other guys did. And I was just standing around there. The beat cop comes in, and they have a discussion, and somehow the kid convinced the cop I didn't do anything. So the cop was just about to let him go, and all of a sudden, one of these guys that works there has the kid's jacket He goes, officer, officer, I found this in his coat, and he pulls out a hanger that's unraveled, straightened out with a piece of chewing gum at the end of
A tried and true method.
it. Right, right, old
Yes.
school.
Yes.
And this is, I guess he was trying to, well, now the cop felt like a fool because he was just about to let him go. So, I mean, look, I'm sure the statute of limitations is way over on this stuff, but he took him to one of the confessionals and I guess had to straighten him out.
Yes.
So that was one that stood out. Yeah.
Now, I would preface what I'm about to say by saying that I started out as an usher. I ended up in the EMS, in the Ecclesiastical Maintenance Service.
That's right, you did. Yes.
So I ran the gamut. The ushers were the people who were most likely to deal with those situations, and those situations arose very often. We almost had like a museum in the ushers' break room of different devices that were used for the purpose
really? Never
of
knew that.
jimmying the pour boxes, and
Right.
there were all kinds of methods. But my favorite story of all was I was in the break room. There's a room off to the side where the ushers have their lunch, and I was in the break room, and there was also always a regular crowd at St. Patrick's Cathedral. There were folks who were there night after night after night. So you got to know them and they got to know you. And this lady rushed in to tell me that a fella had grabbed one of the collection buckets, one of the elongated, the buckets on the stick that you use to go up and down the aisles. And he was walking around the church soliciting money from the people by putting the basket under their noses. And so I was probably about 18 or 19. And I went running down there and I got the guy and I grabbed him and I started, taking him out the door. And he said to me, "You were in for half." And he, I wish I could remember what I did exactly with the money, because he had like 40 or 50 cents. But he just, that was, because obviously some of these guys were nasty when you caught them, and obviously, as Fred said, some of these guys were penitent, or at least tried to get away. There were right across the way from the break room was the bridal room, where a bride who was getting married, especially in the lady chapel in the back of the church, she would go in there to make the final adjustments before she faced the music. And it was a little room with a vanity and a little dressing table. And on a couple of occasions, I promise you, we never roughed anybody up, but we would, put on a nice show for people who misbehaved. We'd bring them into that room and we'd tell them we were going to lock them in there until the police arrived. And that was usually a point where we got, tearful confessions and promises not to do it again. I have a story to tell you later on about the bridal room if you want to hear it. But there's all, as Fernando said, the candle stands, thousands and thousands of votive candles that people are coming in all day long and lighting. And when for a while I worked the graveyard shift, I worked from 11 to 7, and you had to clean out every single candle stand in the place. And that was basically what the night man did, and that was not exactly an exciting gig.
No.
Well, they're all electric now. I was telling Fred when you were reconnecting that I do miss the aroma and the essence of it when they had those candles in churches, not just St. Pat's.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But it's all electrified now. So you throw a quarter in, you get like a minute and 10 seconds or something. It's like a parking meter. It's been a while now. It's probably been more than a year since I've been to the cathedral, which is unusual for me, because I pop in, if I'm in the vicinity. I don't know anybody anymore.
But if I'm in the vicinity, I'll stop in because I love
Yeah.
the place. And the last time I was in there, it was a mixed bag. You know, there was still some good old fashioned votive candles, and there were some electrified ones. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And but the downside of that wonderful aroma was, as Fred said, you know, cleaning out those candle stands.
Mm.
A little
Yeah.
rough.
Oh yeah, I remember having a cart, and they give you a box, a plain paper box, and yeah, and you would scrape out the wax. And by the end, by the end of your shift or whatever, finish doing that, it was like a mountain of wax, like this ridiculous looking, distorted mountain of wax.
Now, is there secrets to this building that you guys might be aware of? Like, I know Fred and I spoke about you. Well, first I asked you, is it true that the roof is shaped like a cross? And you said yes. And you were telling me a little bit about going up on the roof, Freddie.
Yeah, JR, I think my first week there, I think yeah, you took
I'm
me up
gonna
there.
Yeah, I'm gonna trust Fred and Tom that there is a statute of limitations.
I
Okay.
would hope so. For 40 years, right?
I'm gonna say very candidly, and may God forgive me. There were times when maintenance men had to legitimately be up on the roof, which is to say, in the rafters between the ceiling of the cathedral and the actual roof of the cathedral. And it was, and you know, the main reason that we would have to go up there was to change the light bulbs, because the light bulbs, the chandeliers would have to be lowered. Back in the old days, they did it by cranes. In our time, they did it with electric drills. And we had it was a very long process to change the light bulbs in the church. And you would have to go up there. And it was absolutely fascinating. And I went up there for every time for every time I legitimately went up there, I went up there about 5 or 6 times illicitly. And I'm afraid that I did take more than a few people up there with me. And I also, starting when I was an altar boy, I went into the one place that you were absolutely never, ever supposed to go into, which was the spires. And the reason you weren't supposed to go into the spires is because it was dangerous to go into the spires, because they were old-fashioned wrought iron spiral staircases that were no longer safe for anybody to be on. And there wasn't any reason that anybody had to go into the spires. But fortunately, there is a statute of limitations, because they'd fire me if they knew. But, I'll tell you a story, if you like, about the gay pride parade one year. And, a friend of ours, who I'll leave his name out of it for now, another maintenance man, on the day. Do you want to hear this?
Yeah.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and Tom, you should continue to ask questions about the upper reaches of the cathedral, because it's absolutely fascinating. And,
Okay.
and you got to know somebody to get up into the rafters. But as I mentioned before, as the gay community became more assertive and the Archbishop became more controversial, there were bigger and more pointed protests, especially on the day of the Gay Pride Parade. And there was a lot of concern about people coming in, not only to disrupt services, which happened all the time, but for whatever reason. And and remember, we're all kids at this time, right? Freddie, I think you probably were in college, right, when you started working there.
I graduated. Yeah,
You
so
had,
about 22.
yeah. So I was 17 when I became a paid employee, and I was 23, 24 when I started. So we were very young men, and we very innocently, this other maintenance man and myself, when a guy my own age, we only wanted to go up and see if we could find a perch where we could see everything. And we go up, and we open up an access to the roof. And the minute we open up an access to the roof, we discover that there's at least 30 police officers on the roof of Rockefeller Center across Fifth Avenue. And the minute we open up the latch, they see us, and they're all on their walkie-talkies. And they're pointing at us. And we know, as a matter of fact, the fellow I went up with wound up becoming a cop. And I think he was waiting on the academy at the time. So the two of us just ran down. It's a miracle we didn't get killed, ran down, back down to the roof, then back down to the church. And we came out at the entrance, which is in the vestibule of the church. And the head usher was standing there and saying, what were you doing upstairs? I said, we had to go upstairs to the choir loft. We had to clean up a mess up there. He says, the cops just told us that there's two guys up on the roof and they're trying to put a banner out over the side. We have intruders in the building. And I was like, and I said, the head usher of St. Patrick's Cathedral, may God be good to him, was the legendary Mr. Richard Yaska.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes. And I said, Richard, trust me, there is nobody on the roof. And he said, but the cops just told us that there's I said, Richard, trust me. Tom and I have just come from the roof. There's nobody on the roof. Everything's fine. He says, well, the cops are probably going to go up to take a look anyway. And I said, well, of course. And covering my face so that nobody sees me. But, I mean, it's a funny story, but, it speaks to the changing of the times, That's where it was. But, I mean, very, very few people, and I'm sure even fewer people, get to see that part of the building. And it's just fascinating because it's an old Gothic cathedral.
When was the cathedral built? Do either one of you know?
The construction of the cathedral started in the late 1850s. It was halted because of the Civil War. And then it was finally completed in 1879. It opened for business in 1879.
Wow.
And incidentally, the reason I have all this at my fingertips is because I was the altar boy who carried the cross for the centennial mass, the centennial celebration of the cathedral's consecration. And the guest speaker at that mass was Fulton Sheen. And it was Fulton Sheen's last appearance at St. Patrick's Cathedral until his funeral. And Fulton Sheen died exactly 1 year before John Lennon on December 8th, 1979. And the reason I know that is because I was at St. Patrick's Cathedral the day Fulton Sheen died. And I was at St. Patrick's Cathedral the night John Lennon was killed.
Oh,
which is another story. Yes.
So I can't remember if it was either you, Jay, or you, Fred, that was talking about when being on the roof when Reagan was coming into the cathedral. Ronald Reagan, President Reagan.
Not me, no.
Okay. First of all, that was me, and I will clarify right now. Nobody got anywhere near the roof. What happened was I was able to see early that morning, and let me again preface, Ronald Reagan, after surviving his assassination attempt, came to St. Patrick's shortly before Cardinal Cook died. When the news had been released that Cardinal Cook was terminally ill, Reagan came to pay his respects to Cardinal Cook, and we knew he was coming. And this was, a little more than a year after the assassination attempt. So security around the president, which was already very heavy, had become just nuts. And I saw Ronald Reagan's arm as he walked from his limousine into the Cardinal's residence. There was the blocks around the cathedral were cordoned off, 5 blocks in each direction, for the hour and a half that he was actually on the property. We saw him at about 8 o'clock that morning, which is to say, we saw his motorcade coming up Madison Avenue. very early that morning, but nobody got close enough to see Reagan when he went into the building because the police presence and the Secret Service presence was so heavy. But we were all very disappointed too, because we figured we had the bird's eye view, and as we have already suggested, we had a lot of access. Part of our duties as maintenance men were also in the Cardinals' residence. I don't know if you ever your shift, unfortunately, Fred, would have precluded you from going into the Cardinals' residence.
No, the closest I got was I think the dining room.
Yeah. The dining room of the rectory or the dining room of the Cardinals' residence?
I think of the Cardinals' residence. They had some sort of an event, and I was called up there.
Mm-hmm.
But it was his residence, actually. One and only time.
I would have to go sometimes on maintenance calls, and I was like the plumber's helper. I'm not skilled in any of those directions, but that was part of the responsibility of the maintenance crew. Maintaining all the buildings. So I was frequently in and out, and there were keys that we used when it was necessary to go in. There were ways to get in that we knew about that other people didn't know about. But trust me, and remember that before Reagan came, the Pope came. Pope John Paul II came for the first time in 1979. So the Secret Service were all over that as well. And the protocols. I wasn't at St. Patrick's Cathedral the day the Pope came, because I was with I was with the high school students who saw him at Madison Square Garden. But because I was an employee of the cathedral, I had to, submit. They made us fill out forms that, just basic information about each one of us, and they had to make an accounting of anybody who had access to the building. Fred, did you have the key to the outer gate?
I don't think so.
Because I thought that I had to have a key to the gate where we got in the maintenance area, because I worked all the shifts. I could get into St. Patrick's Cathedral, and again, statute of limitations applies, right? I could get into St. Patrick's Cathedral 24/7 when I worked there, only because I had access to the maintenance area gate, which was literally a gate. It was a wrought iron gate at the bottom of a staircase. Somebody must have had to let you in then when you worked there. But the cathedral was still open.
Oh no, it was still open at that point.
When your shift started, no, I'm saying the cathedral itself was still open, so you wouldn't have had that problem, right?
No, I wouldn't have that problem.
But
I forget.
I
forget leaving which way I went. There must have been some way. That gate, maybe.
You could go out the gate without a key.
Yeah.
But my shift would start. The morning shift started at like 6:30, and the evening shift the graveyard shift started at 11. So if you were working those shifts, you had to be able to get in. And once you got in, if you knew where all the keys were, you could go just about anywhere. And I did. But I have a feeling that it's probably not that accessible anymore, because times have changed.
Right. Now, Jay, speaking of, I'm sorry, you mentioned, Reagan. I know you have plenty of stories of your brushes with fame. I mean, in your time there, a lot of celebs came through that place, right?
The best stories are those stories. Yes. The best stories are those stories, the stories about celebrities. Do you want to go first?
The only one I have, and it's a boring one, because I was only there 6 months. My only brush was the physicist, Edward Teller. Do you know him?
I know the name.
Manhattan Project.
You're a better man than I am that you could recognize.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm into that stuff. But anyway, he was one of the original. He was one of the original Manhattan Project. But he's also better known as the father of the H bomb. He's much reviled by the nukers. And and at the time, there was a funeral for, I think, was it like another physicist or something? And so we were all told Edward Teller would be, be there for this funeral. And so, yeah, security, because they weren't sure if, protesters would show up, because this guy was really hated, because he advanced the whole nuclear arsenal. He was a big proponent. So, yeah, so they were afraid, that they would show up. I don't think they ever did, but other than, the other one was
Well, did you get to meet him?
no,
No.
He was in the church. But then the other one there was a visit from the Archbishop of Manila, who ironically was named Jaime Sin.
I remember Jaime Sin. I met him.
Remember Jaime Sin?
Yes. He was the youngest member of the College of Cardinals. When
Oh,
he was
okay.
elevated he participated in the conclaves for both John Paul I and John Paul II, and he was the junior man.
Oh, okay.
And next in line to him as junior in the College of Cardinals was a fellow named Joseph Ratzinger.
Oh,
who
really?
went on to become Pope Benedict XVI.
Right.
So maybe I'll start with that one. Okay. So
Okay.
when I was an altar boy at St. Patrick's Cathedral, we showed up every Sunday for the 10 o'clock mass, and the 10 o'clock mass was the high mass, and every other high mass at the cathedral was the cardinal. Every other high mass was the archbishop, and there would always be visiting dignitaries, archbishops and bishops from all over the world coming to those gatherings, which was how I got to meet Jaime Sin. I got to shake hands with him, a wonderful, wonderful man. But one Sunday I missed, and I had a place to go with my family. And the reason I was an altar boy at St. Patrick's Cathedral was because I went to Cathedral Prep, and Cathedral Prep for generations provided the altar boys for St. Patrick's Cathedral. And that was just a part of, an activity at the prep. So I go to school on Monday morning, and the other altar boys are telling me, that they miss me because it was a really big mass, and they were a little short-handed. And they said, the celebrant of the mass was the Archbishop of Krakow, a guy named Karol Wojtyła. And at the end of the mass, he came down and he had coffee with us and donuts, and he sat with us for a while and he chatted us up. And he's a really good guy. And that's Pope John Paul II.
You actually did, Jay?
No, I that's the thing. I wasn't there.
Oh,
The day the Pope came, I wasn't there. I missed him when he was Pope, but I also missed him when he was the Archbishop. Now, I saw Sinatra twice. And let me preface that by saying I saw Sinatra 5 times. Okay, once at Carnegie Hall, once at Jones Beach, once at Madison Square Garden, and twice at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And the first time he kind of brushed past me, and I said, "Oh, who was this little old Italian?" And then I realized that it was the chairman of the board. So Frank Sinatra is the Grand Marshal of the Columbus Day Parade. And he's, as the Grand Marshal of the Columbus Day Parade he's sitting in the front row. And when the time comes for communion, the thrice married, twice divorced Frank Sinatra receives communion from the coadjutor Archbishop of New York, John McGuire. Archbishop John McGuire was a lovely, lovely guy, a wonderful man who was a peer of Cardinal Cook's. He was like second in dignity to the Cardinal, and he was an elderly man. He was substantially older than Cook, and Cook died young. Cook was like 62, 63 when he passed away, and Cook was like 47 when he became Archbishop, which is like a baby, for archbishops and cardinals. But Archbishop McGuire was well into his 70s when he gave Frank Sinatra communion at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And I just happened to be walking back over to the parish house, which is the public access to the rectory, when when Archbishop McGuire, I met him in the hall, and you know, and he was a great guy. He was a regular guy, and I said, "Good morning, Your Excellency," and he was, "Oh, Jr., how are you? How's everything going?" You know, and we both entered the public area of the parish house today to find a couple of from some UPI, I don't know what, a couple of reporters waiting for him because they wanted a statement from him as to why he gave communion to Frank Sinatra, who was clearly not eligible to receive communion in the Catholic Church. And I was almost like shielding, 19 years old, right? Almost shielding Archbishop McGuire with my body.
No comment. No comment.
That's something. No, the guy got right up into the Archbishop's face and said to him,
Wow.
"You gave communion to Frank Sinatra, and Frank Sinatra, a divorced man, is obviously not eligible to receive communion." And Archbishop McGuire looked at him and said to him, "I wouldn't know Frank Sinatra if I tripped over him. Go away." And he just turned around and walked off. And I watched these two guys, these two reporters, they looked at each other, they shrugged their shoulders, and they left. That was it. And
not the comment they were shooting for, probably.
Right,
No.
Right.
And,
Yeah, they
you
wanted
know,
to be at the time
right,
viral, you know.
Yeah, right.
Viral. It's hard to go
Yes.
viral without the
Yeah.
internet.
Yeah, it took about 3 or 4 months to go viral back then.
Yeah, right.
Just, you know, cut off. Now, I will say that the next year, the Grand Marshal of the Columbus Day Parade was Sophia Loren.
Was she
So I
divorced
saw-
too?
Well, you know, I don't recall that Sophia got up for communion, but I will
Okay.
say this:
She knew better. Yeah.
I saw Sophia Loren, and it was like looking at the sun. she was radiant, you know, and it was cool. One time, Farrah Fawcett and Ryan O'Neal came in,
Oh, wow.
and not for nothing, Farrah Fawcett also like radiant, like you know. I wish you could see me because I was enacting it. What I did at the age of 20 when I suddenly came face to face with one of Charlie's angels, you know, and she was just beautiful, you know. You want to hear one more,
Oh, sure.
or more than one more? I'm sorry. You know, I don't. You two guys went to school with me, so you know. Okay. All right. Just one Sunday, walking around, and the cathedral was packed, and I see Carol O'Connor,
Archie Bunker.
Archie Bunker, and he sees me,
Oh, really?
and I'm looking at Archie Bunker, and Archie Bunker's looking at me, and my take is, and I never got more than 20 feet, but I mean, to see Carol O'Connor in person, I mean, like, you know, to see Archie Bunker in person, right? Piercing blue eyes and white hair, right? And it's amazing to me that nobody has recognized him yet.
Wow. Yeah,
But he being Carol O'Connor, understood that I had just recognized him. And I had this moment with Carol O'Connor where I was looking at him and he was looking at me, and my take was that he was begging me silently to shut up. He was like, I mean, he looked like he's just standing there, you know, and
like
people were
pleading,
walking
right?
past him.
I know that you know who
And
I
we lock
am.
eyes, right? And we lock eyes, and he's like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah, right.
And I nodded my head, and I turned around and I walked the other way. And I got to the first phone I could get to, and I called my mother and said, "I just saw Carol O'Connor at the St. Patrick's Cathedral," which is incidentally what I did, you know, both times with Sinatra. You know, I mean, because it's Sinatra.
Well, Carol O'Connor was Irish, right? Wasn't he from Ireland?
I'm not sure about that.
I
but
kind of remember.
mean, obviously, you know, he was a member of the tribe, no doubt about it.
For some reason, I remember him talking with a brogue in an interview somewhere.
Really?
Well, as I have demonstrated, I didn't actually speak to Carol O'Connor. You know,
Yeah, but
I let him go.
If he actually naturally spoke in a brogue, then his Archie Bunker thing was pretty impressive.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. A nice, New York
Yes,
accent. He had it down.
I know that
Yeah.
his politics did not lean in the direction of Archie Bunker or slouch in the direction of
That's for
Archie
sure.
Bunker's politics. But
That's
I
another
just thought
time.
I just thought that was very cool.
Yeah. He's probably pleading. He's pleading with you. Please don't start
Yeah,
yelling.
I'm telling you right now, like, and the thing was, at that particular point, I was like, Richard Nixon showed up for Cardinal Cook's funeral. And, and we were inside the church for Cardinal Cook's funeral as the cameras, because it was, broadcast live. And I was a maintenance man by then. And we were inside watching on the monitors because they let all the dignitaries in before anybody else. And they were all seated in places of honor. And, I remember distinctly watching Richard Nixon and Ed Koch having a very amiable conversation in the front row of St. Patrick's Cathedral about half an hour before Cardinal Cook's funeral started. And they, like old friends, they were just sitting there chatting, And they decided, when Cook's funeral was over, they decided at the last minute that they were going to let the family and the dignitaries come back to the crypt, which is the burial place under the altar where all the archbishops of New York are buried. And, and Cook was actually interred there. And what usually would happen when somebody was interred there was, after the service was over, they would close the church for a while and they would do it privately. But I think Cook's sister decided, to make it part of the funeral. And at the very last minute, they were scrambling because all the dignitaries, including Richard Nixon, came, down the stairs. Fred knows, down the stairs.
Yeah.
Between
Below the altar.
And the
Right.
sanctuary. And the access to the crypt is right there.
Right.
And at one point, I was standing like behind Richard Nixon. I could have tapped him on the shoulder. I could have smacked him in the head. I was that close to him, which was not part of the plan. And the only reason I was back there was because Bob Van Winkle. You remember Bob Van Winkle?
Yeah, the boss.
Yeah, Bob was our boss. He was the
Yeah.
superintendent of the cathedral.
Right.
And he and I had actually opened the door of the crypt, as somebody had to, having no idea that we would not be far, far away by the time it happened. But we were standing there and we just got caught in the crowd. And he and I are sort of standing there, and Richard Nixon is right in front of me. And I'm like, I could get into the paper right now, But I remember, and I had great respect for Ed Koch, who, as a mayor, but also like I ran into him once or twice, not only at the cathedral, but at Manhattan College and other places. I thought he was a very stand-up guy, but I got to tell you, the next day in the papers, they had this article about how at the end of Cardinal Cook's funeral, outside the cathedral on the Madison Avenue side, Richard Nixon put his hand out to shake hands with Ed Koch as they were parting, and Koch snubbed him. Koch turned his back on him and walked away. And there were all these stories in the paper about how Koch snubs Tricky Dick, and I, that was kind of grimy because I was sitting there in the church watching
a true politician
television, while these two guys were, talking shop and
right.
seemed to be having a very nice conversation. But you do when and Fred, I hope you'll agree with me about this. And I'm sorry, I'm such a chatterbox, boys, but when you are in a place where there's a lot of dignitaries and a lot of powerful people and a lot of serious stuff going on in a service capacity, you really are like a fly on the wall,
Oh, for sure.
They really don't notice that you're there, and rightly so, because you're there to be, to do your job.
Right.
And it's amazing how people will behave around you from time to time when they don't think for any reason that they have to mind their P's and Q's. around this person and
Two-
that person.
Two questions for either one of you. Is it true that all of the archbishops of New York were either Irish or Irish heritage? And two, is there anybody else besides the archbishops that are buried in the crypt?
The answer to your question, the first question is yes. So far, some of them Irish, like the legendary Archbishop John Hughes, Dagger John, the original Archbishop from St. Patrick's Cathedral. Fulton Sheen is buried in, although that's been contested. They might have moved Fulton Sheen by now. Toussaint Louverture is buried down there. I'm trying to remember it. I think he might have been canonized. I know he was beatified. African-American New Yorker, who, if he's not a saint now, he'll be a saint soon. All of the rectors, or most of the rectors of the cathedral, the priests who are actually assigned as like the pastor of the cathedral, they are all entitled to be buried down there. So there are a number of, for want of a better term, lower clergy buried in the crypt, besides the archbishops. But to my knowledge, those are the only ones. Most of the, it's Hughes, McCluskey, Farley, Hayes, Spellman, Cook, O'Connor, and Egan, all buried in the crypt.
Is it creepy down there, Freddie?
I never had the pleasure of going down there.
No.
It's actually very nice.
Yeah.
DJ,
and
never took me down there.
Well, listen. If they caught you, listen. If they had caught me, if they had caught me on the roof, they probably would have fired me. If they caught me in the crypt, I would probably be in the crypt. Okay, and I only knew where the key of the crypt was because I was kind of, after 7 years I was on the inside. Nobody went into the crypt without permission from there wasn't any reason to. Every now and then somebody would have to go in there and mop because it's all marble,
Right.
But it's a mausoleum. They're in the walls, and the markers are very simple. They're just their names and the dates of their tenure as well as their lives and deaths.
So their families wouldn't be able to go in there and pay
Sure.
respects? Yeah.
Sure. But I'm assuming that family members would call ahead because somebody would have to let them in, it's not an area of the church where it's not an area of the church where people have access. You wouldn't have, it's literally under the main altar. So it's within the area of the altar in the sanctuary, which is strictly speaking off limits to anybody but clergy and employees. But within that, there is a gate to the crypt, and the gate is locked, and it's a chore to get the door of the crypt open. It's almost 200 years old at this, although not almost. It's way over 100 years old, and it's an old fashioned. It's a whole big production number to get down there, and there isn't really anything to see, and the only people who would go down there, as you say, would be people who wanted to pay their respects to, family members.
As cathedrals go, based on the dates you gave us earlier in the podcast, they built that pretty quickly, no?
I at the risk of waxing, poetic and cliche at the same time, like every other magnificent church in New York, it was immigrant money and immigrant labor, and immigrants wanting to build monuments to their faith. They called St. Patrick's Cathedral Hughes's Folly because it was, and they called it the Wilderness Church because when they started construction, this was after the grid had been laid. but this was before the total, I want to say urbanization of Manhattan. Midtown Manhattan was still very rural in the 1850s and the 1860s. The downtown area was still the center of everything. I mean, that has got to be the single most valuable piece of real estate on the planet now. Okay,
Yeah.
50th and 51st between Madison and Fifth. But at the time, it was out in the middle of the boonies. And it was in the sticks, and people thought that Hughes was foolish. Why wasn't he building? Well, old St. Patrick's Cathedral is on Mott Street. Right. That was the center of the city at the time. When it became clear that a new cathedral was necessary because old St. Patrick's could not accommodate the numbers, Hughes chose an area that was very rural and still very pastoral. And he was a man of vision. The story of New York City is the story of visionaries, the story of people who saw what the city was going to become, and he saw at least as much as anybody else did. Because look where St. Patrick's Cathedral is.
Yeah, but
And
even with that,
everything.
even with what you said, it's still, they built the thing in 20 years. That's pretty good.
And they essentially took the 5 years, let's say the 4 years of the Civil War, 61 to 65. There was no construction going on during that time. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you.
Yeah.
But like I said, I think it was the determination that the building be built and open and ready to go.
My memory of that place, and it's been quite some time, as Fred said, it's been quite some time since I've been there. They have a lot of side altars, right?
Sure.
Now, what are they for, and why is that different from, like, how many masses do they have a day in there?
I don't know what the total is right now. When I was there, they had a couple of more masses than most Catholic churches do, because they had people looking to go. Like there were always 3 masses in the morning and 3 masses in the afternoon, and so there was 7 weekly masses at St. Patrick's Cathedral in my time, and well-attended masses. The
7
side
a day?
altars, 7 a day, yeah. On the main altar, and the side altars, including the Lady Chapel, were for private masses. There would be times when priests would come in with small groups, and they would want to say mass at this altar or that altar.
Mm-hmm.
There is a private chapel downstairs in the sacristy where the priests get ready for mass, that a priest can come in and say mass there if they wish. There's the Lady Chapel in the back, where funerals are held and weddings are held, in addition to the ones that are held on the main altar. So there was a time, I would imagine that it's very, very rare that those side altars are used for mass. But they're at the risk of sounding a little, I want to say regulation altars. They're all good to go if somebody wants to come in and say mass. Which
they all have candle holders in them, right, Freddie?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Right. They all have the votives. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And ushers had to go around at night collecting the money out of that. That was the last detail before we closed the cathedral at 9 o'clock. Was we went around. One guy manned the keys and one guy dragged the bag.
I would think they took in some coin over the course of the day,
betcha.
just from tourists, right?
You betcha.
Yeah.
And and there was a counting room, right? Wasn't
Oh
there?
yes, yes.
Just like a casino.
Oh, let me tell you. I'm sorry, but I'm accessing files in my brain I haven't used for a long time. I was also one of the counters for a while. I would go Monday morning to the Herculean task of counting the money. And there was a coin separating machine in the vault downstairs. So there were 3 or 4 guys who just had to do that, and we sat at that. You remember, Fred, the huge conference tables in those meeting rooms downstairs?
Yeah.
So the closest one to the sacristy was where the vault was.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember the vault.
And the Sunday night guy, or the Sunday night guys, the Sunday night ushers would have to take all the money out of the safe upstairs in the church and bring it down to the vault. So I also had keys to the vault.
There you go.
Yeah, and I was a trusted. I was not a trustee of the church, but I was a trusted member of the staff. And we would have to go Monday morning and put the cash, the currency, in the bills in great big boxes, separated like the poor boxes and the candle boxes and the collection boxes. And the priests, plus a handful of ushers, plus the ladies who worked in the gift shop, plus Bob Van Winkle and I would sit around the table counting the money. And it was, a dirty job because it was, filthy lucre, as they say. And, you'd have, but it was a panic. It was, you split your sides laughing at the things that people said around the table. And people really let their hair down in that situation.
So how did they do that? Did they have like an armored truck come in or something?
Now this is I'm telling you, Tom, you're pitching me, you're pitching me softballs here.
They didn't have you guys carry them
no,
boxes.
Oh, absolutely not. Brinks truck.
I have an armored car story.
Oh,
Hit it.
Let Freddie tell his armored car story.
Well, like you said, right. Eventually, that money had to be deposited in banks, right? So the armored car company would come in, and JR, you remember it was like a real labyrinth, like underneath.
14 people are going to watch this, and I didn't tell people where the vault is.
Underneath the cathedral, or I think more of the parish house. So it was like a labyrinth, right? Like the basement.
Underneath the altar?
Yeah. No, not under the altar. The basement of the parish house, which was the public house. And somehow when the guys from the armored car, when they came to get the money, right, they'd have to go, what Jay said, to the vault, and then on hand trucks that they bring it through this, all this maze of passageways out to the truck on the street. And one time I didn't know they were down there. And there they are. And there they are with their hand truck with God knows how the thousands, and change and bills. And I just, come walking around, as part of my job, around one of the other corners, whatever. They weren't expecting anybody there. I mean, the guy didn't pull out his gun, but he's like he, he put his hand on it. He was ready to unholster it.
Exactly look like a dangerous guy though, Fred. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know. Is that?
Well, was there a uniform you had to wear, Freddie? That would.
Yeah, it was. Let me see if I remember. I think they were like your standard, maintenance guy, city maintenance guy. I think it was brown pants, JR, maybe, and a light brown shirt.
Dark brown pants, light brown shirt with your name. If you were around long enough, your name would be emblazoned.
It's right. It was actually stitched. It was actually stitched on. Yeah,
and EMS.
So the guy should have known you worked for the church.
I must have popped out of nowhere, and I don't know. The guys a little jumpy that day. I don't know. Maybe he had to call me.
The Brinks guys were probably some of them. I think might have been retired cops.
Yeah, but I think most of them usually are. Yeah,
they obviously they were licensed to carry firearms.
Oh yeah,
and they did. Now what would happen was they would take the money because it would be a big load. They would take the money up in the freight elevator,
right?
And you're not supposed. People are not supposed to ride on freight elevators. You get into a freight elevator. There's always a sign: "No human passengers," or words to that effect. And what would happen was, there would usually be 2 or 3 guys, and there'd be a guy waiting up top, and there would be a guy who supervised the money being loaded, and then he would run up the stairs and join the guy at the top. And they would both unholster. They wouldn't draw their guns, but they would unholster their guns during the time.
Yeah.
And there was one guy one time who insisted on riding in the freight elevator. And what one of us would have to do, and since I was in the counting room, I was also very often the guy who operated the freight elevator when the Brinks guys took the money up and down the stairs. I'm sorry, up out of the place. So this guy insisted on getting on the freight elevator, and he was riding up with the money. And I said to him, people are not allowed to ride on the freight elevator. He said, no, he must have been new. And he said, no, man, I'm staying with the money. That's all there is to it. I'm staying with the money. Now, the freight elevator was filled with lumber that was being brought in and out of the church for something. And this guy was riding up in the freight elevator, and a piece of lumber bowed inside the freight elevator and whacked him in the face.
There you go.
And knocked his glasses off, And what would happen was you would have to press the button and the elevator would go up, and then you'd have to run up the stairs and be up there by the time the elevator came, which, freight elevators move slowly, so it wasn't a problem. Even for me, it wasn't a problem. So, I could hear it happen,
And this is one of these elevators that it popped up right into the street, right?
Yeah, right. It just opened up right into the main entrance of the parish.
Right. The hatch opened up, and that was the elevator just popping up out of the sidewalk.
And so the guy.
What if somebody was walking by? I'm just curious.
It's there.
There was a Brinks truck. There's a Brinks truck parked in front of the parish house, and there's two guys with guns. And that's and they're taking, and they would have to be very strong thieves because it was a couple of tons of coins.
Yeah, really.
But this guy is like he said, I'm going to sue the church because my glasses are broken now. You're going to buy me new glasses. And I said to him, I told you you're not allowed to ride in the freight elevator. You don't have a case. He was a little sore in every way that a person can be sore.
Imagine.
Yes.
Well, I'm sure, I know we're way over time. I'm sure you guys have a lot of great stories. With your permission, I'd like to have you back again in a month's time or so and tell some more stories about this. I'm intrigued by these stories.
I'm delighted.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
It's almost like a little slice of New York City history. You don't really get exposed to all of it often.
And I would argue in all seriousness that, like all slices of New York City history, and you know where I'm coming from with this, between St. Patrick's Cathedral and the Tenement Museum, this is very dear to my heart. Every slice of the story of the city contains within it the whole story of the city. And the story of St. Patrick's Cathedral is the story of New York. And we were privileged. And I frankly, more than Fred, only because not because the length of time I worked there, because I worked every shift that there was. I was a maintenance man and an usher. I saw amazing things. I was privileged to see historic things. Pavarotti and Placido Domingo singing on behalf of the United Nations in the sanctuary on the one day of the year that the UN had an ecumenical prayer service where all the churches and all the denominations, I know we're wrapping it up, but I'm just saying, 17, 18-year-old kid listening to Pavarotti sing Ave Maria in the sanctuary of St. Patrick's Cathedral, because I worked there, I could have worked stocking shelves at a supermarket, which I did, but instead I had
at the Rosemont, which is the other side of that religious coin.
Right, the Rosemont. Yes, yeah. One day, we'll do a podcast on the Rosemont if you like.
Oh boy,
sorry.
Yeah,
I do go on, boys, as you know. But
no, that's all right. I enjoyed. I listening to the both of you, and the stories you told were very interesting.
Yeah. No, and at the same time, but I remember telling people I worked at St. Patrick's, and they were like, "Wow, really?" No, people were impressed. I mean, it's world renowned.
Yeah,
it's it's an institution, and people were like, they found it, impressive.
Yeah, I think JR said it best. Each aspect of New York City history has in itself the history of New York City.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and JR was fortunate because he worked both at St. Patrick's and the Tenement Museum, which is also a cool place to work, I think, as an outsider looking in,
Oh, yes,
I'm
definitely.
telling you.
And you fulfilled your holy day of obligation every time you did a shift.
That's right. Sure, I never missed a mass.
Yes, and you got
And I
paid
got
for it.
paid.
Well, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not
Well,
too
I
shabby.
I do appreciate you guys coming back, and if in a month's time you guys are available, I have to have you back and finish these stories.
I'm there.
Sure.
Yeah. So we'll talk to you.
Maybe
And
my camera will be working by then.
I've said quite often during the life of this podcast how fortunate I am to have you guys as friends all these years. I hate to say how many because I figured it out this morning, but
Let's not go there.
a hell of a lot of years. Let's put it that
Yeah.
way.
Just
Right.
remember, well, Freddie and I go back to the first grade.
That's
Yeah.
true. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
right. You and Freddie and I go back to the seventh grade.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's still, the numbers are still astronomical.
Oh, we're talking like
You know.
14, 15 years, Fred.
Yeah, we're talking. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Nah.
you wouldn't want to be hanging by your thumbs.
We could actually now talk in terms of century.
Half,
Well,
half,
yes,
half a
yes.
century.
Every century.
We
Half
Yeah.
a
met a
century.
century ago. Yes, yeah.
And
Generations.
and we're all here to talk about it, which is makes it even more fortunate, right?
It does definitely.
Generational friendship. Yes.
So I will let you go. I appreciate the stories, and I really hope you could both come back and let's say before Thanksgiving. Just so people know, we're recording this the day after. I was going to ask you before you go, where do they do the Al Smith dinner?
I don't know. They
I
did
believe
it
it's
at the Waldorf.
Waldorf.
Oh, the Waldorf. Okay,
No,
Yeah.
but the
Because
Waldorf's gone.
we're talking.
The
We're
Waldorf
talking.
is gone.
Yeah,
It's
but
what? It's
The
gone.
Waldorf's gone. It's been gone for years.
well,
Oh.
it's still a
Okay.
hotel. I don't know if it's called the Waldorf Astoria.
Oh, maybe. No, you know what? Yeah, I mean, they've always held it there. Maybe not. I don't know.
Mm.
Yeah, you're right.
But
That was like the president always stayed at the Waldorf when he came to
Yeah.
New York. That was why Reagan's motorcade was, we'll
Uh,
go back to that again.
I think it still is there though, Jay, because some Chinese company bought it,
Yeah, they
and
bought it, I
and they
think.
prevented Obama from going there because they were afraid about the Chinese eavesdropping on them.
Listen, I'd be very happy to hear that it was still there because it's also an historic building.
It
Douglas
is.
MacArthur lived at the Waldorf.
Yep, that's true. He did.
Herbert Hoover lived at the Waldorf.
Well, the
And
reason
did-
why I asked is because as we discussed before we started recording that back when JR's face was here, we're recording the day after the Al Smith dinner.
Yeah.
So that's also a Catholic tradition.
Yes.
Right.
Which
So-
went right off the rails last night.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Conversation for another time.
Yes, conversation for another time.
Yes. Yes.
But for this time, I do appreciate you guys coming on, and we'll look forward to part 2 of this in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Tom.
All right,
Thank you.
man. Have a great
Yep.
evening, sir.
Always
Great
a
to
pleasure.
see you guys.
All right.
Always a pleasure to see my friends.
All right.
Good night, boys.
Good
Good
night.
night.